Hello YouTube, welcome back to the conservatory. So today is going to be the big day. It's where we discover whether the bike is going to run or not. So following on from the last video, I've actually fitted the little breather box down here, and I fitted some fresh petrol hose. As it turned out, I did have to remove the airbox and I did have to remove the carb trumpet tray in order to get the hose on for the airbox breather. And also, whilst I was at it, I fitted the fuel hose. To be honest, it would have been a bit of a pig of a job otherwise. So in true rebuilding fashion, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But we're there now. So in today's video, we're going to top the bike up with coolant. And before I start it, I want to give it a bit of an oil change. Now, the oil that's in there, the bike's been sat in storage for at least 2, maybe even 3 years now. So the oil that's in there will have degraded, and I don't really fancy firing it up on it. So I'm going to put some fresh oil in it, and while we're at it, we're going to change the filter and might even do a little bit of lock wiring. So I'm going to move you guys around, and we'll do the oil and filter. Okay, so here we are back at the bike. I've got my old washing up bowl underneath, ready to collect the oil, and you'll notice I'm wearing latex gloves. Now, I'm not the sort of person who normally wears gloves when working on bikes. I just tend to rip them in about 5 minutes after putting them on, as I probably will in this video. But this is one of the few occasions where I do always wear gloves, because dealing with sump oil, it's pretty nasty stuff and you really don't want it soaking into your skin. So it's well worth putting a pair of gloves on at this point. Okay, so draining the oil is as simple as undoing the sump plug. Normally, obviously you'd run the engine up, heat the oil, get the oil up to temperature, purely because the oil becomes more viscous and drains better as it gets hotter. Obviously, as I said, this oil's been sat in this bike for at least 2, maybe even 3 years. I really can't remember how long it's been in storage. It's been that long. And I don't really like the idea of firing the bike up for its first run with this old oil in. I'd much rather put some fresh oil in and start fresh. So I'm going to drain it cold. It's not an issue draining it from cold. You can do it perfectly fine. The only difference is obviously it will all drain out. It just takes a little bit longer, so you've got to be a bit more patient. But that's not a problem. I've got a cup of tea on the side ready and waiting, so I can have a cup of tea when I'm waiting. And let's see if I can do the usual trick of dropping the sump plug in the bowl. No. Yeah, you can see that oil is pretty black and nasty. Ooh, excuse me. So we're just going to leave that to drain for a while. Like I said, with it being cold, it's not going to flow as quickly, but it will all flow out eventually. And already I managed to spill some on the floor. Right, whilst we're waiting for that to drain, I'm gonna do the oil filter as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I don't really want to get oil all over my freshly painted downpipes. So I've got a bit of tin foil and I'm just going to put that in here to basically catch any drips, because of course the oil filter should also be full of oil, which is all going to go somewhere when we undo the filter. Just put them in there. Obviously this is something you don't really need to do, but move that forwards. And actually make a little funnel so that it drains into the bucket as well. Right, so removing the oil filter. You can buy these little filter wrenches The problem is they come in different sizes to suit the different filters, and this is the only one I've got. And as you'll see, in fact, let's show you on the new filter. It's very much a case of one size doesn't necessarily fit all. You can see this is way too big for these oil filters. So what I tend to use is one of these universal filter strap wrenches. You can get them with a chain, or you can get them like this one with a nylon or webbing strap on it. I prefer the strap variety. Doesn't make so much mess. The key thing is you've got to remember to put it on the right way round. So we're going to be undoing it, so we need to go that way round. So I'm just going to put him on the filter and just wrap it round itself a few times just to take up the slack. And again, we're just going to get the socket with the extension on. And what happens is, as you turn the ratchet, it takes up the tension in the strap, grips the oil filter, and then eventually you can see the oil filter will start to turn. Okay, so that's loosened that off nicely. And there you can see all the oil dribbling out of the oil filter, but thankfully it's all running down our little gullyway and into the bowl. So that little thing worked. And again, try and take the filter off without dropping it in the oil. And it is just a case of holding it there, drain the worst of the oil off. Okay, let's move you back again. So I've got a whole bit of rag. I'm just going to wipe the worst of it off. Now you may be wondering why there's this Jubilee clip around the oil filter, and the reason for that is it's a racing thing. You need to lock wire the sump plug and the filter on to make sure that there's no chance of them coming loose whilst you're on track and depositing oil where it shouldn't be deposited. So you can get two types of filter. They do a race filter, and that has like a hexagon, almost like a bolt head welded on the end that's pre-drilled to put the lock wire through. If you haven't got the racing type filter, you can take a standard filter like this, and then what we do is we put the big old Jubilee clip round it, and you can see there's the remnants of the lock wire there, and that just grips the lock wire, and then you can have the lock wire. So I am going to lock wire the new one on when we refit it. Okay. So I'm going to leave that dripping for a little while, go and have a quick cup of tea, and I'll be back in about 10 minutes or so. Hopefully all the oil will have drained out by then, and we shall carry on. Okay, so I've had my cup of tea, and as you can see we've pretty much stopped dripping. There's still a little bit just coming out the end of the filter housing, but I've gone round, I've given that a good wipe over with the rag, trying not to drop it in the oil. Make sure we've got a nice clean mating face so that the replacement filter will seal properly. Okay, so that's that all cleaned. So if we take our new filter, remembering to remove the plastic first of all, and then we're just going to put a little bit of oil around the O-ring just to lubricate everything up and make sure it slides on properly and doesn't bind while we're tightening it up. And as you can see, me and latex gloves really don't last very long at all. So that's that all cleaned. Let's just put the oil out of the way so I don't knock it over. Oh yeah. Knew I should have left the tin foil there for a bit longer, but never mind. Right, and then it's just a case of tightening up the oil filter. Now, people tend to go a bit mad with oil filters. You don't need to reuse the wrench to tighten them up. Just do them up, hand tight is enough. And then once you run the engine back up to temperature, you may need to give it just a little bit of a tweak just to get it up to the final torque. Okay, so that's our new filter on, and whilst we're here we might as well do a bit of lock wiring. As I said, it is a requirement for race bikes that oil filters, oil drain plugs and the oil filler plugs are all lock wired in place. Make sure nothing comes loose while you're on track and you end up spilling oil where you shouldn't. So you can get two types of filter. You can get the race one, like I said, that's got the little hex on the end that's pre-drilled to take lock wire, or if like me you're just going to use a standard oil filter, you can achieve the same thing by clamping a big Jubilee clip on nice and tight and then lock wiring to the Jubilee clip. It's not as pretty, doesn't look quite as racerish, but it means you can use absolutely any regularly available filter and you don't have to pay the extra £1 or £2 for the spangly race ones. So I'm just going to get that in the right position. And clamp that up nice and tight. Okay, so the idea is with lock wiring is we're going to run some wire from this clamp down to a hole that's drilled in one of the engine castings, and what you want is to run the wire in such a way that it puts the item under tension. So this oil filter is going to want to turn anti-clockwise to unscrew. So by putting tension on it this way isn't going to help. We actually want to put tension on the other way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the camera around. We're going to go to the other side of the bike and we'll do the lock wiring from over there. So bear with me a second while I move you. Okay, so here we are around the other side of the bike, and hopefully you've got a slightly better view of what's going on as well. So the idea with the lock wire is it's to put the object, usually a nut or a bolt, under tension and stop it unscrewing. So as I said, the oil filter is going to want to rotate anti-clockwise to undo. So what we want to do is put a clockwise force on, so pull it this way. So I'm going to take some lock wire and we're going to run it round the end of the Jubilee clip. I'm going to wrap it round the bottom of the Jubilee clip here, and then we're just going to come down to this casting which I've pre-drilled and cut holes just so we can thread the lock wire through. So here's your lock wire. It is literally, as it says, it's just a length of wire, comes on a spool, and we just have to pull off enough to do the job. Now obviously as you tighten the lock wire on itself, it's going to wrap round and it's going to shorten, so make sure you give yourself plenty of slack. So go about half as far again as you need to go, just to make sure you've got plenty of lock wire. It's fairly inexpensive stuff, so if you end up just throwing a a few centimetres at the end, away at the end. It's not the end of the world. Okay, now in order to, you can fit lock wire using normal pliers, but it's a hell of a lot easier if you get yourself a set of these. So they're a set of pliers, so they open up and they grip, and then what you do is you actually lock them closed, if I can show you, by sliding this part against there. So now they're lock closed and they grip the lock wire, and at the other end there is this little knurled knob, and as you pull it, what it does is it actually causes the pliers to rotate. But you'll see all that in action in a second. So I'm just going to clamp the end of our wire. So you can see we've got the loop of wire there, and we're just going to hook it around the screw part of the Jubilee clamp, and then you can see as we pull the end, you should be able to see the pliers twisting. And the idea is you want to do it so that we get a good firm grip around the Jubilee clip. So I'm just going to unclip that, move the pliers in a little bit further so we only twist the very end, and then you should see it just tighten up nicely against the Jubilee clip. So there we go. Right, so these are going to run to this point here, so that's where we're going to clamp the wire next, just a little bit behind that point. And again, just repeat. So hopefully you can see we've got some nice twists in the wire, and it ends right where we want it to go through the hole in the casting. If I can find it. There we go. In fact, I've actually got to untwist it a little bit. I did too much, because the whole point of lock wiring is that it should be tight and under tension. Right, so we just go through the hole. Actually, and you can see now that is under tension, and we just repeat and twist the last bit. So again, pinch your cables together, your wire together, lock your pliers on, and then we're just going to form a little twist there. You can see that's now going to securely hold the oil filter in place. We're just going to trim off the ends, and it's always a good idea just to fold over the end of where you've clamped. So you haven't got something sharp to catch yourself on at a later date. and there we are. So that's the oil filter on, and lock wired, and my latex gloves pretty much about to destroy themselves. So all I'm going to do now is we'll put the sump plug back in, move this out of the way so I don't knock it over by accident, and then we'll start refilling the oil. I don't think you really need to watch me fill it with oil and lock wire the sump plug on, because it's exactly the same principles. So I'm going to leave it there. We're going to fill it up with oil, and then we shall come back a bit later on. Okay, so here we are outside, full of oil, full of water. I'm just going to add the petrol next. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run it off a remote petrol tank here, which means we're not going to use the fuel pump. So I'm just going to unplug the fuel pump for the time being, because obviously we don't want that running dry. But what I am going to do is I'm going to plug this little LED in from the previous video, and I'm going to put that in the fuel pump socket. So the idea is I can check that the fuel pump is getting a signal. This little LED should light up. So, petrol, here we come. Tank is exactly the same as the green one I made in the previous video. The only difference is I'll put a bit longer hose on it just for today. Okay, here's the fuel. Now, for those of you that do worry about those sort of things, there is a fire extinguisher just inside the door of the shed here. Hopefully we won't need it. Okay, by lifting the pump up, you can see fuel's running through, so we'll give it a few minutes to run through, and whilst that's running through, I'm just going to have a quick check round, make sure there's no leaks, nothing's coming out. So far so good. Just move what's left of the fuel out the way. And well, there's nothing else for it. Wish me luck. good news is she's a runner. The bad news is I've got a little bit of a leak coming out of carb number 2 from the float bolt. So I'm just going to tighten up the Allen bolts on the bottom of that and see if I just need to nip that up a little bit. It does definitely seem to be dripping out just out of the actual float bowl itself, rather than, yeah, it's leaking out the front of the actual float bowl. So it could be that there's something wrong with the seal on that one. But yeah, so let me go and tighten that up and then we'll run it up to temperature. Right, well, the good news is she's definitely a runner and she actually runs quite sweetly. Bad news is I'm going to have to nip the air box and the carbs off. I've definitely got a bit of a leak somewhere around the float bowl on number 2 carb. It's probably just where the O-ring hasn't seated properly, or I may even have just nipped it when I tightened everything up. So just to be on the safe side, I'm going to take the carbs off, check the float heights as well, check the gasket, and fingers crossed, that's all we need. But in the meantime, let's have a bit of fun. Going to run it up to temperature anyway. Okay, well, I'm just going to leave her idling, get her up to temperature, hopefully bleed the system through on the coolant, and yeah, back to taking the carbs apart, I'm afraid. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon.